Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel. Thanks for logging on. We're fortunate to continue our journey through some of the highlights of the current Bell & Ross catalog. We're looking at one of the flagships of the vintage line. This is the Bell & Ross Vintage BR-V2-94 Black Steel Chronograph, a throwback to the best of the middle of the last century. The sports watches that came to define both aviation and motorsport, embodied in the design of a timepiece that is something of a love letter to the era. Now, the watch is 41 millimeters across the round of its steel case, and we may as well demonstrate it the way you're going to own it, which is on the wrist. You can see that the timepiece is classically inspired, but with perhaps a more contemporary 41 millimeter diameter. The timepiece wears well and suits modern tastes while still paying deference to history. It has a wonderful ultra-domed sapphire, so you get some of the vintage distortion effects of a mid-century 1950s, 1960s plexiglass thermoplastic crystal, but while you get some of the same charming distortion, you get none of the inclination to attract scratches or scuffs, as the sapphire effectively hard enough that only diamond can routinely scratch it. You'll also note that the profile of the watch, though somewhat loftier by virtue of the sapphire, remains manageable at 13.9 millimeters. With the slope of the case flank, the conical bezel, and the domed sapphire, it will slip underneath tighter cuffs if you wish to wear it with formal attire. Across the wrist, you can see on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, the watch is an easy fit on a smaller wrist, even as it has the presence and the stylistic gravitas to look well on a bigger arm. It's a compact 47.8 millimeters lug-to-lug, and you'll find that you have many options in terms of how you can wear the watch, as the steel and the black and white calibration is a universal combination that wears well with just about any sartorial choice. Now, the spacing between the lugs is 22 millimeters, so if you do want to accessorize, you're going to have a bevy of options, as that is a standard lug spacing. The strap, as provided by Bell & Ross, is a handsome piece. Black with an aviator-style contrasting stitch. You can see that it is a traditional aviator's calfskin leather, very lightly bolstered. It's not excessively so. It has just enough volume to nicely match the swell of the lugs. You can see on the underside, it is a natural colored calfskin and a Bell & Ross factory piece, nicely paired with a full deployant clasp, whereas a vintage timepiece would likely have featured a NATO strap or a pin buckle. This one features a deluxe folding clasp. You'll note a tripartite folding clasp, trigger release, so not a cheap clamshell closure and not friction fit. This one only opens when you depress both of the triggers. You'll also note that the underside of the clasp is designed to arc and curve and trace the curvature of the underside of your wrist for outstanding comfort. There's a perlage finish on the inside of the chassis. All other components are polished. The nice thing about a deployant clasp is that it makes it difficult to accidentally drop the watch while donning or removing at bedside. The timepiece, featuring a combination of finishes for contrast, pays homage to the slim case profiles of 1950s and 60s sport chronographs. In profile, it does have a delicacy and elegance about it that makes it an appropriate choice for dress attire, but you'll note that the satin finish, a little bit more rusticated, a little bit more severe, calculated for contrast on the hoods of the lugs, reminds us that this is in fact a sports watch, as does the aluminum insert featuring the tachymeter scale. The tachymeter is a reference point on your bezel that can be used in conjunction with a standing mile or a standing kilometer and the chronograph seconds hand to gauge the speed of an object, calibrated to 400 units. This one is appropriate for aeronautical as well as automotive purposes. Of course, you use the chronograph seconds hand and the tachymeter scale as a reference. You start when the car, for example, begins the standing kilometer, and at the point that the car crosses the threshold of the end of the standing kilometer, you stop the chronograph. And for example, if it took this much elapsed time, approximately 14 seconds, it would be a 250 kilometer per hour trip through the standing kilo. That's how the tack works. The dial, especially its typeface, is designed to recall the mid-century, and it's well matched to an oversized bicompax or twin register chronograph design. The twin register design is evocative of 50s and 60s chronos, and it's been oversized deliberately, a stylized feature that makes it both more evocative as well as more legible. Now you can see the calibration for chronograph minutes mounted at 9 o'clock, a constant seconds with crosshair calibration, more simple in its layout at 3 o'clock, and you'll note the aperture for the date at 4:30 is underplayed. It's a rather discrete date as the aperture is minimalist, it's small in size, it has a little bit of a planed step to it, so it doesn't show a sheer or severe cut from the plane of the dial down to the disc, rather a blended and rounded profile arcing down from the dial to the disc, which is black with a high contrast white on black print. It's there when you need it for that convenient information, but it's unobtrusive when you don't want that information. We'll resume our chronograph, and you'll note there is a Delta-style counterweight to the chronograph seconds hand, evocative of 1960s interceptor aircraft like the Avro Arrow or the US F-106 Delta Dart. Of course, the oversized hour hand, broadsword fashion, evokes vintage timepieces, but the baton-style minute hand is designed for precise reading against the minutely calibrated white-on-black scale outboard. Now, there is a matte coloration about the dial as well as an AR coating to reduce the inclination of glare on the dial, and you will note that the timepiece features shouldered crown guard for sheer protection as well as screw-down chronograph pushers. Now, all of this endows the watch with a modern 100-meter water resistance rating, so though vintage evocative, modern in its fit finish specifications and materials. So this is an aquatic watch if you throw it on a water-resistant band. Through the display caseback, you can see a high-grade Bell & Ross caliber BR-301 automatic winding with bidirectional action. Very little rattle, very little sound thanks to the bidirectional action. It is a refined system with a 42-hour power reserve. 37 joules, it beats away at 28,800 vibrations per hour. Now it has hacking or stop seconds so that you may synchronize it against a reference time, as well as a quick set for the date so you can rapidly cycle the date should the watch run down or encounter an irregular length month. It's based on a high-grade 2894 vertical clutch chronograph base. You can see and learn more about this and the entire collection of current Bell & Ross premium timepieces on our website, govbergwatches.com. And we are back with the Bell & Ross Vintage Collection BRV2-94. This chronograph features a vintage style but modern luminova for easy legibility by night. You can see it and discover all details on our website by day at govbergwatches.com.